final discussions regarding the proposed fiscal year 2020 budget, following are the results of several weeks of budget deliberations or hearings. Overall, the Board of Supervisors has reduced either through increased revenues, expenditure reductions, use of unobligated funds, a limited use of cash reserves, the original proposed tax asking of $37,056,208 to $35,404,131, which represents a reduction from what we originally proposed of $1.652 million. Now to the numbers that mean the most. Our total proposed tax asking for fiscal year 2020 of $35,404,131 increased by $788,716 over the current tax asking of $34,615,415 for fiscal year 2019. The county, through new valuation, rollbacks, new construction, whatever, the county had available $864,684 of new tax revenues without an increase in the current tax rate. So actually we had about $75,000 of new valuation tax dollars we did not use. Okay, regarding the tax levies, the countywide levies, which affects all cities and the counties, went from 7.26169 for fiscal year 2019 to 7.18. I'll skip the next three numbers, but I have to carry them out 5 places, we'll skip that. For fiscal year 2020, so that represents a reduction in our current tax rate of 7.91 cents. The rural township levies, which includes the countywide tax levies plus the rural basic tax levy, township only, went from $9.50, $9.51 approximately, for fiscal year 2019 to $9.68, an increase of 17.17 cents. The major reason the township levy increased is a result of a $350,000 increase in the secondary road minimum tax levy tax asking requirement. To generate the increase would increase the tax rate by 27.4 cents, but that was offset somewhat by the 7 cents or almost 8 cents that we reduced on the countywide levy. So with that all said, any action today will have a minimal effect on above results. So we do have several items on the agenda here to talk about. One thing I'd like to go through a little bit before we start to show the implication of, how much we reduce taxes, what we do. The priority of the legislature this year and the governor was to get a property tax limitation bill through. The House came through with the first one, and I think I included that in your packet, where they're going to limit property tax increases in future years, such as 2021, will be based on our 1920 fiscal year 20 tax base that we set up when we approve our budgets this year. That will be allowed to be increased by CIP factor, which is going to be based on the, I'm trying to find it here, Midwest Census Region. They sent out, that's what they're proposing on the House side. Senate hasn't got theirs out yet. They'll probably be similar. So they're going to take away all of our supplemental levies, combine everything into one general fund and one rural basic fund. Those will have the limitations. The ones that don't have limitations will be mental health and disability services, which makes sense, emergency services, debt service, capital projects, and any supplemental levies that are not included in the 2 general services amounts. So it's kind of key, we have to be a little bit careful how much we reduce this year, because it could have a snowball effect going down the road for future years. It depends which bill gets passed, but there is going to be something passed this year. That was one of their #1 priorities, is property tax reform. We did get caught, about 20 years ago. I don't know if the engineer's here yet, but we did reduce $400,000 one year because we had excess money. Not excess, bigger reserves that we thought we had to reduce. We reduced the $400,000. Then the legislation came through and put a tax limitation on. And for 3 years, we got stuck by having to reduce $400,000 each year, plus we lost $400,000 from the state unused tax each year. Finally, we went to the state appeal board. We got that lifted reversed where they allowed us to go and get back our $400,000 for the new year coming up. We didn't get back all the money we had lost, but we got to get back up where we should have been. So using reserves is risky because we're using it for operating costs. Now it's even a little bit riskier because it could affect our future down the road when you get to fiscal year 21, because limitation would be based on taxes levied for fiscal year 20. Any questions on this? They also, one more thing, they also give us the ability, levy authority to build our reserves back up to 25%. So if we're 17% in our general fund, we could rebuild it back to 8% if the board, and I hate this, go out and taxes, say $1 million just to build our reserves back up. I really don't see that happening, but they give the boards the authority to do that if they so desire. If you're over 25%, you get penalized. But in our case, we don't have to worry about it because we aren't there. We're a little bit short.
Is it Blackhawk over 25%?
They probably are. Probably way over 25%. So eventually it will come back to haunt them. So in the case where we're at, no, we don't have to worry about it, but you do have the option to rebuild, but you don't have the option to reduce because they'll force you to reduce if you're over 25. Any questions on this?
Well, that bill's obviously written with other counties in mind. Here in Woodbury, we're about to lower our levy for the 5th year in a row.
Right.
But just so we communicate why there was a sudden shift towards the rural levy, is it correct that the improvement request for the uniform officer eventually was funded out of the rural levy, although
Yes.
it was presented as part of the countywide levy last week?
Yeah, because I took it out of the general basic fund and put it over to rural basic.
Right, so that's the other
Actually,
reason for
right, it
that
reduced
number.
about 2 cents, almost 2 cents.
Yep.
And added on to the rural basic. But hopefully that uniform patrol will be out in the rural, not Sioux City. Yes.
And how much does that represent of the whole, I mean, it's about 350,000 for the minimum.
Yep.
In
And
order-
84,000 for the additional deputy.
So how much?
84,000 for the deputy. That's with benefits. So, and I had the opportunity to talk to a rural person today. Some of the people might remember his name, Leonard Wilcox. Ralph Wilcox was his father, was the last supervisor on the board that was actually a true rural supervisor. I went through and, explained his taxes, all this to him. And that we can get into a little bit later here, but I'll tell you why he left. He didn't really have a problem with the tax increase. And we'll get into that as we go through this a little bit. So I guess we're ready to move on.
You must be a kind of rural.
I feel left out.
You're a kind of a rural.
I lived on a paved road. Jeez. Take away my birthday, Dennis.
The other rural person was about 35 years ago, 40.
Do you have a lawn tractor, Rocky, or?
A riding mower.
Close enough. I got that.
All right, so let's move on to review and action on budget items. Jeremy Taylor and Dennis Butler. A, action on district health request for funding and additional expenses for FY20.
Yeah, this one, we did have 102,554. The board did grant 3 line items. They gave back 23,722. That's already calculated in our tax sheets. The extra is 78,000 probably is not calculated in our tax rates, but if it's all approved, I can tell you what it's going to do, or if part of it's approved, I can tell you what it's going to do.
Okay, thank you, Dennis. Kevin Green, Director at Sun District Health. The document that I put in front is last week you had asked for some additional data related to these potential increases that we're actually looking at. At the top is under our laboratory, which also does our building services. You had questioned the need for the additional increase, and so what is actually there is we went through and put the actual total expenses for the last 4 fiscal years, and then also what we requested in for fiscal year 20. And that is for the 3 line items of lab supplies, custodial supplies, and building maintenance. And we looked at aligning those with actual expenditures. One of the things, just for clarification, is the fiscal year 15 in building maintenance. That dramatic drop, that was the year that we began sort of the new process of, prior to that, Sun District Health Department had maintained primarily responsibility for total maintenance of the building, as we had funding and that type of thing. And then that sort of also then coincides with when Kenny Schmitz came on board as the County Building Services Director, and so they moved under and took more acceptance for the management and some of the maintenance of the building itself. So related to this is that some of these building maintenance are just your small incidental, because anything that goes over $2,000 comes back to the county as far as maintenance items within that. Below that then, say toilet, plumbing, those sorts of things, those are the responsibility of the Sullivan District Health Department. So that would explain, and that's kind of just an illustration as to what potential justification for that additional funding. Down in the under the public health services data, you'd ask for numbers. One of the things that we have experienced that I mentioned last week is the onset and the increase of sexually transmitted disease exams and also treatments. You see across the way what we've actually had from 2015 to 2018 of total exams. These are done by nurses, the majority of those, and then also a breakdown of the males and the females. Below that then, the disease prevalence. Those are some of the diseases that we have detected, the number of cases. One of the ones that I take a look at, you may see in that inclusive list, so what does this mean for time-wise? Underneath the line of the gonorrhea, that's one that we have to do an injection. So that's more nursing time is what it was to actually follow up to reach with those individuals and to do the treatment. And then when we get down to TB or tuberculosis, you see the number of total clients. It actually doubled, almost doubled from 17 to 18. And then you look at some of the tests that were conducted and then also the number of meds given. And then down below are the active TB clients, and that's one of the things, diseases we monitor quite closely because of the impact it can have. As you see in fiscal year 2018, we had 7. This year we're already up to 6. And so with the TB, what it amounts to is that is directly observed therapy that requires a staff person to go out and actually observe the individual taking the meds that have been prescribed to them. And the thing that I also want to let you know is as far as the savings to the health cost or healthcare costs, the medications and the prescriptions for these are actually provided through funding that we get from the state. So we are able to get those free to those residents that actually have some of these diseases that come in to seek our services, and it is no cost to them, but we are responsible as a public health agency to be using the staff time to make sure that those get distributed, they're monitored, and they're also administered. So those are all pieces that exist under there. As a result of some of this trend upwards is what it would be. We did kind of a correcting with nursing time. As I said last week, we leveraged grant funds prior to this. Related to some of these positions, but these are actually portions of positions that we want to move back onto tax dollars to do these core public health services. And then those others maybe need to be backfilled with other non-nursing staff. The interpreter position, I will admit that was new. Never thought about it going through the improvement project. And then when you get down to the negative of the revenue, as we went back and truly went down and took a look at our revenue trends and our potentials and did some other projections, that's probably closer to about 1,000 to 1,500. So I mean, there's automatically when we're looking at some, as far as reduction in asking is what it would be. But those are some of, that's the data, that's the numbers that I pulled together. Just trying to help explain and justify why the additional request.
Do you have numbers, thank you Kevin for this, do you have numbers for the revenue from the last 2, 3, 4 years as well?
We have not, I mean, basically what we looked at is we took a look at the revenue is we have been almost fairly consistent, right around with the same amount of revenue that's come across the years, which is, let's see, would be nursing. Medicaid fees have stayed consistent, and then also the nursing fees. So we're right at around 106,000 is what we have, and it's wavered in between there from 109 down to about 100. And that is what it was. And so that's what we kind of looked at as far as the amount of potential revenue we anticipate coming in over the last 4 to 5 years.
But how do you come up with the 13,000 if it's relatively consistent over the last?
Well, when this budget was, originally they were anticipating, there were some things within the Medicaid billing that originally one of the items that we came up with, they thought there was a delay in receiving reimbursement, which would have put it from last year into this year, and then we were thinking we're not going to get that next year. So that was one of the incremental reductions because it would be just, it would overinflate what we showed as our trend for this year. So we monitored what we had. We're 60% through the budget year, and we looked at being about 53%. So when we went back into the tracking, we discovered that we're probably right on target for that actual revenue continuation in that area as far as Medicaid reimbursement.
So if that's the case, then is there no longer the justification? I guess what I'm looking at is typically when we look at the jail revenue, for example, we look over 3 or 4 or 5 years, so that if this one particular year is just an anomaly, say, well,
That's-
average, or if it's.
That's what we went at, and what we did after we kind of looked over the trend is that's when we said about 1,000 to 1,500 would probably be the maximum of our revenue shortfall that would be built. So that 13.2 would go down to about 1,500.
Any other questions on this, or any other recommendations?
From my perspective, a couple of thoughts. I think if we definitely take off the anticipated revenue reduction, as far as backfilling that, to me, it seems kind of a minor amount now, especially if it seems like it could be backfilled. And then I would look at the new position. I know the interpreter may be needed, but it's one of those in comparison to the tight budget that we're looking at. That I might look that we reduce the overall budget, and I'm not talking about line items. So I know we can't do that, but if we did something where we're at 43,000 from the total increase that's represented there, rather than the 78,832.
Yeah, that wasn't approved last time is what it was, yeah. Those items that were under the budget. So yeah, the total would be that we'd be looking at as a 78,832. So which would be minus the 22s, and then you take minus the 22,740, and then remove the revenue reduction to backfill that.
Sure.
That would be a reduction, my calculations would be of 55,940 is what it was as far as within the tax asking.
35,940.
So you're looking to add about 62,000 from before.
Well, actually, it would be 52, because that the up above is included with that too. The 78, it reflects both the increase in the nursing and the lab budgets. So then if we would remove that 35,990, I think if I did it correct, like 52,990.
I had 42. 42,892. That's what I came up with. That they would allow. So you disallow 35,940 if this is what you go with. But in my case, I have to add 42 on, because none of this is actually in our budget because of the timing issue, which we explained last week.
Dennis, do you have currently this, what do you have reflected in the tax rate?
For our current total tax rate countywide,
Do you have this, or just the?
I have just through
approved
23,722 that you took off. 78,000 I do not have in here, in the 7.18 cents down. So if you allow it at all, the whole 78 would go up about 1.8 cents.
Talk about 43,000.
Okay?
Penny?
If we allow
The 40,000 reduction, if you reduce 40,000 even, it's 0.9 cents. But 9/10 of 1 cent add back in if you did 40,000. So if you did a little bit more than that, it'd probably be about 9.2 or 3 cents. Every penny's 44,000 bucks.
So about 1 cent, not 9.2 cents.
Right, I already got, yeah,
9 tenths.
right. Represents a $40,000 add-in.
Okay, so about a penny.
Yeah, about a penny. Yep, I'll buy that.
Just so I'm clear on the anticipated revenue reduction, we're going from minus 13,200 to minus 1,500?
I'm suggesting 0.
Zero,
I just think it's
okay.
minor enough in the long.
So anyone have a motion they want to make on that?
So I'd move to allocate $43,000 additionally, in addition to the items that were approved last week.
Do we have a second?
I'll second.
So we got motion by Taylor, second by DeWitt. Any other discussion on this item?
Yeah, so which one are you taking out then, Jeremy, the interpreter?
Well, he's technically not taking out anything.
Yeah, I know, but
But looking at,
not approving, not adding in.
looking at the revenue.
Reducing the allocation by that amount.
Yeah. Yeah, no, because we can't do line items. We can only
Right.
do the,
That was about my grandma's volume on the phone there.
but I like to have an idea why we're doing what.
Nope, that's.
Any other discussion? Did I say that was motion by Taylor, second by DeWitt? Okay. All right. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? I'm going to oppose it. So that passes 4-1. All right, moving on to B, action to reduce the transfer of gaming revenues to general basic fund. Thank you, Kevin.
Yep, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this is in response to Supervisor Ung last week suggested that we take out the sort of reserve within the reserve in the debt service, which I think was a good move. However, with impending legislation and with the anticipation that, as you mentioned, Keith, we're sort of taking that reserve to maybe patch over continual operating costs. I think it'd be wise to put $125,000 back into gaming revenue, not with the intent to spend it, but to kind of put aside the biblical year of plenty for the biblical year of potential need next year. I just think if we reduce all of that out of that reserve, and we've used everything from gaming that we're using, I'm worried that we're going to cut too deeply and that the legislature will set our base
Sure.
that deeply as well
We're just going to take it out of this pocket and then put it in this pocket.
for a future.
Okay.
And it still represent a tax reduction, but, and visiting a little bit with Supervisor on it, I think that that was maybe
Yeah, I think it's a good idea.
We're still leaving the 250 in the debt service. We're reducing the transfer from gaming revenue by 125,000, increasing.
still taking it out of that service
Right.
right now.
No, debt service still stay 350, won't it?
No, you're taking out the reserve within the reserve, so to speak. You're taking that savings and you're winnowing that down, right?
Right, in debt service.
Right. But we're putting back 125,000 into gaming.
Gaming, okay. So the debt service is staying the same. We're still using 350 for out of reserves to reduce for 1 year.
Well, we didn't move 350, did we? I thought we moved like
250.
250.
250. So that's going to go up to what? 375?
It'll stay the same. Through what Matthew wanted done.
No,
If we
through
were at
what?
100,000, he increased it by 250 to 350. Is what we're using reserves. Sure? And go back in the minutes.
We approved the minutes that say
And I'll check my numbers too, make sure.
250.
Sure I did what you wanted, 250, okay.
Yes.
Stay with that. Yep,
So our previous, sorry,
right, we're leaving that alone, right, the 250.
yes.
We're just changing the general basic deeming, okay. Yep.
So just roughly, we added a cent back with the previous action. This would represent about 3 cents.
2.5.
125, almost 3 cents.
Okay, so
Close, yep.
our tax rate is now approximately $7.22. Well, still a 4-cent reduction.
Yep.
Okay.
So I'd make a motion to reallocate $125,000 back into gaming revenues.
Second.
All right, motion by Taylor, second by Ung. Any other questions or discussion on these items? All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Passes 5-0. And let's move on to secondary roads allocation of the additional $350,000 in taxes as a result of the minimum levy requirement.
I wanted on this item just to, as Dennis did earlier, make aware that the reason that rural basic is going up is because if we don't levy the minimum, we're going to lose dollar for dollar in road funds, which the county did, I don't know how many years ago that was, Dennis, but it's essentially a mandate from in Iowa code that we do it or lose exactly that much money when the state treasurer next year reduces our county allocation. So with that, I asked Mark if he would help to identify where those dollars were going, and then I'd like to offer a motion based on that. So if that money is almost mandated to be raised, and I think that's one of the things that legislature needs to be aware of as they give mandates and certain percentages of rollbacks, and then say we need to live within our means, that's a reality.
I've got a couple of information sheets here for board members. This shows what our major revenue areas are. Our road use tax fund being the largest, and you can see that actually peaked in 2017, the year after we started receiving the 10 cent per gallon fuel tax increase. And in 17, 18, and then the projections for 2019 and 2020 are that is steadily going down. Time 21 money is money that is raised for vehicle registrations primarily. That's the money that gets dumped into the Time 21 fund, and it gets distributed to counties based on the same formula that our road use tax fund does. So you can see that that's been gaining. 2018 was a big year for people replacing vehicles, but the projections are smaller here for the current 2-year period. You can also see the history of our local sales tax. Our minimum effort tax, as you can see, for 15, 16, 17, 18 was about $1,028,000. We had $1.3 million on top of that was that special project levy that we had in place. So you're seeing 4 of the 5 years of that here. But I guess the key is in looking at this, that actual increase to our department is about $317,000, not the full $350, because of the reduction in our state revenues. So it was that $317 that I was addressing with the email that I sent to Supervisor Taylor. The areas that we primarily looked at putting this money as, basically our gravel budget would be held where it is currently at, which is roughly $1 million a year that we're looking at purchasing. We have $100,000 to repay the general fund loan that the department was granted for the purchase of the Bracy Farm property. That is the location of our new gravel pit. We made our initial payment in fiscal year 2018 when that was put in, or 2017 when it was purchased. 2018 we paid $100,000 and we'll be paying $100,000 again in 2019, 2020, 21, and 22. After that, that'll free up that money to where it can go back into actually buying gravel. In this case, it's allowing us to save some money each year, because when we're buying gravel from properties that we own, we're not paying the dollar per ton royalty that we would have to pay if we were buying it from a commercial source. So therein again was one of the issues for which we brought that Brazy property, was to secure gravel reserves for a period of years while we were working gravel out of that area. Our wage increases this year, roughly $52,000. We had looked at putting some additional money into new equipment this year so that we could do some timely replacements of motor graders coming along. We've got some machinery that is getting to the end of its life, where more and more expensive repairs start to typically come upon us when we get into that 11 to 14,000 hour of wear and tear on a machine. Those are typically where we see the very expensive repairs, engines or transmissions going down on us. If you recall, last year our motor grader trade was just a little over $20,000. That's because we were trading off a machine that didn't operate anymore. It required a $40,000 transmission repair that we knew we would never get out, with that being the next trade-in machine that we had in the fleet. Looking at this, again, we proposed money going into that new equipment to address what I felt were some needs within the department. If the board has a preference towards seeing that money going to gravel, I guess that's guidance that we would look for the board to give the department. We need both, and in this case, we're staying at that minimum levy rather than asking for more than we absolutely have to, and trying to live within the means that's given. One of the discussions that we've had is how much of this revenue is generated by CF Industries. That's the second sheet that is attached to what I gave you folks. This shows what the revenues generated by the CF Industries property would be based on the agreement that the board has with them, and applying what that minimum levy is. And this is assuming, next year we'd generate about $109,000. That was assuming if you had no debts that were being paid off through the TIF. I think in Dennis, in going over those figures today, figured that the actual revenue for 2020 would be around $48,000, not the full 109 won't be realized because you're paying off other debt service that the county has already.
So one of the discussions I had with Mark is I'd like to see us put the money from CF revenue on the schedule to gravel. I know that's not something that would bind us, but as a goal, just because as more and more of that money comes online, I think it'd be nice to have a way to show rural taxpayers this is where that additional money, at least from CF, is going.
You can see it grows to a fairly substantial amount by the time we hit the end of the fiscal year 2036, when the full taxable valuation of the CF plant is online.
And I understand the need for, with wages and equipment, but at least taking that portion for this year, I'd like to offer up as something. I know it's a small amount, but I feel like if we don't, sort of like if somebody's in debt and they say, well, it's only putting this much money toward it, well, instead of waiting until it's a really sizable amount like in 2032, to do that gradually, which makes some sense. But that would also come at at a piece of equipment, so there's a push and pull. But I'd like to discuss that.
What's the number we're talking about?
We'd be looking at probably, this is something where we wouldn't be making any changes in the levy, but Dennis and I would adjust the expenditures. And then we would change up our roster of equipment being purchased and put more money into our estimate that we're going to spend on gravel next year when we go out for bids.
But after what's already to pay back debt, you're talking 40-some thousand. 48,000.
And at current prices, that gets us in the neighborhood of 7,000 tons of gravel up on top of the ground is about what that's worth. That would be roughly 300 tons per mile. We're talking about an extra 30 miles being able to address next year.
Where's this 48,000 supposed to be on the budget?
It's part of the 350,000 he's getting.
Okay.
The 48,000 was a sample. If we release $20 million, how does that $20 million assessment translate to taxes? It translates to $441,000.
So it's already in the budget here.
Yes.
So we're just
Yes.
asking him to shift from.
Could be a little bit more, could be a little less. We can get the exact number, but it's already embedded in our tax base.
So Jeremy, are you asking him to go from 100,000 on equipment to 50 or 52 or?
The equipment line item is probably the one where we would have to make the adjustment in expenditures to put more money into gravel this year, because it's by far our largest item next to gravel that we purchase. When you look at our major areas of expenditures, we have number 1, payroll, number 2, construction, number 3 is gravel, number 4 is new equipment, number 5 is fuel. We're around 600,000 a year on fuel. So, I mean, that's really where the bulk of the income and revenue that we have goes a year.
Well, I for one, I mean, the big complaint we always hear is gravel, and whether that's going to help you a whole lot or not. My problem with taking it out of the equipment is then you got no equipment to move the gravel anyway. It does save us on fuel, though, if we don't have the equipment.
if it doesn't run, theoretically, yeah.
You're right, it's just, but gravel is the number one complaint.
They are both needs for the department.
Yeah.
And, in putting the budget and the expenditures together the way I did, I felt we got more bang for buck out of the equipment. But I also understand that, we've talked about it as our department, and we brought it to the board that we need more money in gravel. Mm-hmm. At this time, it's not a big source. It grows to be, you can see it grows to be a fairly substantial amount as time goes by.
What's the total that we were looking at? Aerial overview of what is needed to get caught up. What were we talking?
We were talking just in material to get to that 5 to 7 inch gravel base on 100% of our roads. We were talking about $12 million just to buy the material. That's without a haul or anything.
And that's all.
This is over time, but what I like is the $6.8 million.
It's a pretty good down payment on it.
Yeah, I mean, and I know that I don't like the idea with equipment, but I feel like at least next year that won't be the case, because this would be over and above. This would be all new money.
Yeah, next year we'll have a different minimum levy. And, that's something we discussed here a couple of weeks ago too, is when we're at the minimum, anytime there's a valuation change, that minimum is going to ratchet up just a little bit every year. Because it's not just the rural growth and valuation. We also calculate our minimum local effort from what's going on within the communities too. You can see that first chapter is potential property tax revenue. At 100%, which is $3.03 times our rural valuation, plus 16 7/8% times the general basic valuation, we could potentially raise $4,154,000. We roll that back to 75% to find that minimum local effort. I'm sorry, I should have looked at the 458 or 4,588,000 for 2020. We roll that back to 75%, that's 3,441,000. Then we take out the local option sales tax revenue, and as you remember, 80% of that comes to our department, and it was designed for property tax relief. So the board has this long history of putting that money into rolling back those property taxes. But that gets us down to where we need to levy $1,381,000. I mean, that's right at 75%. That's assuming we don't have any shortfalls in local option sales tax. That assumes we don't have any shortfalls in property tax relief. I pad that by 1%. That's how I came up with $1,450,000. And that's just to cover if we have any shortfalls in either of those revenue sources. It's tight on a budget that big. But again, that's how we come up to the $1,450,000. And again, the 109,512 that you see in that last column is what the full value of CF applied would be if you had no TIF and other debt service to cover. But again, Jeremy suggests a laudable goal of gradually applying that to gravel.
The 100,000 for the Breeze gravel, that's the last time we're paying that, right?
No, we pay it again in 2021 and 2022, and then we'll pay it off. So 2023, we'll be able to pile that 100,000 back into actually putting material on top of the ground, not paying off land.
Because in reality, that 100,000 is going towards gravel.
Exactly, yes.
That's kind of where I see that.
When we save that $1 per 1,000, that's roughly allowing us to buy about 74,000 tons of gravel. We wouldn't be able to otherwise.
How much more?
I'm sorry, I must be calculating wrong. I'm sorry, it'd be about 13,000 tons, wouldn't it? At $7 a ton. So it's allowing us to buy an extra 13,000, just, you know, what this.
$90,000.
Well, 100,000, that 100,000 payment, figure about $7 per thousand. So it's somewhere between $13 and $14. Or I mean, 13 and 14,000 tons. So I'm not doing the math in my head square, but I think it would be 91,000 would be $13 a ton. Help me out, Dennis.
Yeah, 91,000.
Yeah.
Mark,
So,
sorry.
14 comes out to be 108,000, so.
Does your equipment replacement budget fluctuate much?
Back in the early 2000s, when our revenues were tanking, we dropped our new equipment purchases down to around $400,000 a year, and we were only buying one motor grader per year. We paid for that by having to rebuild engines and transmissions in 5 machines. We got back up to 2 per year, and we've gradually seen that those machines where we had to do those rebuilds to keep them operating in the fleet are going down now. We're getting rid of some of them before we have to hit those. Basically, we've been trying to take the prior year plus about a 5% growth over the last 3 to 4 years. Again, that growth is just inflation in cost. It's just like a new car, 2019 model costs more than a 2018 model did. We see that same thing with motor graders. We've seen an increase in the cost of motor graders. When we started buying all-wheel drives, they ran about $280,000. That was 6-7 years ago. Now they're up to $330,000. Is our bid price for them. Then we get trade deducted off of that.
I just don't like shortchanging on equipment because it seems like you can't throw enough money back at it to get caught up, so.
It gets tough. This year what we did, we couldn't afford to buy 2 motor graders this year. And what we did is we have some of that alternate equipment that's getting out there up in age. We bought the semi-tractor and a new lowboy trailer. That was about $100,000 less than what 2 motor graders plus an excavator would have cost us. We had 2 aging John Deere excavators that really need to go out of the fleet. We replaced one last year. We propose to place one in 2020. I should say we replaced it in 2018, but it was a fiscal year 2019 budget. Last, I think our total purchases this year were about 851,000. Next year we propose 962.
Well, in honor of moving things along here, personally, I'm fine with the way he's got it. If you want to propose a change and you get a second, we'll vote on her and move on to the next thing.
And again, you know, the direction that Supervisor Taylor is giving on trying to corral that toward gravel is something we can definitely, you know, we'll consider that and try and show that each year. I think that's important too, but
Sure. And
you know, this year we really have another major need.
So, in the sake of a moment, I'll make the motion to dedicate the, to gravel, from the,
48,000?
right,
Okay,
not the
not the 109.
At some point down the road, maybe a week later, I'll bring back a schedule to have it as a goal, not a mandate, so that we can at least demonstrate what we're trying to do.
And that's something, you know, it's not going to affect your levy, but it's something where Dennis and I will work on the expenditures and revise those.
So that's my motion.
What is your motion?
Motion is to dedicate 48,000,
Additional money to gravel
but from the current levy and line items that you.
from the current expenditure line items.
Right.
do we have a second? Going once, going twice?
Give it at least 3 minutes.
Okay, 3 minutes. Yeah.
This is not a lose-lose for us.
It's just shifting money.
We gain either way. I mean, we're shifting expenditures.
I mean, I guess
And
I'm of
if
the
we have
opinion.
great gravel prices, I fully intend to buy extra, but,
Sure.
you know, again, that's what we look at is when those bids come in, we see if we can afford to do any extra under the contract.
The important
In our budget.
thing is the money is already going to the care and upkeep of gravel roads.
Yes.
And in comparison to $12 million, you know, we do need to take a big step in gravel purchases. But we've been talking for a while on a fraction of a percent.
All right, well, let's move on to item 3, final review and action for FY20 proposed budget for publication. Thank you for the work on that, though, guys.
We're at the point now where we have anything else you want to talk about, adding, subtracting, whatever on our budgets. One thing I need to deliver to you is a compensation board recommendation. Each one of you here, and what you do with this, you receive it today, and action will be taken on it March 12th before our public hearing. So it'll be during our public hearing. It'll actually be an agenda item approving the wages that are submitted from the Comm board or any changes. All changes you got to be reminded of is by percent. So Pat has devised a program where he's broken down where these additional increases, what the Comm board did last time, Pat can fill in on this, is they tried to get some of the elected officials up close. They didn't get them entirely because it's a long ways off, up to where they would rank statewide by population. And in this case here, the board, an unfortunate board representative didn't allocate or suggesting additional. You guys rank 43rd in the state. They approved a 3% for everybody. But before the 3%, they gave the sheriff $3,500, trying to get him up a little bit from where he is currently in the rankings. And the treasurer, they gave $2,200, try to get them equal with the auditor, and also get them up in the ranking where they should be based on population size of the counties. And the county attorney, they gave a flat 5%. So when you go through this with all the additional catch-up, also the percent, the 3% we do have in the budgets for elected officials and deputies, The items wouldn't be the 2,500, the 2,200, and then the 2% above for the county attorney amounts to a total of $8,400. For elected officials, now there's some deputies there, that amount will probably be about the same. But what they try to do, and this is the first time they've done this that I can remember in a long time, they try to catch up the people that are not elected positions, are not up to where they should be with a ranking for every other county, with the exception of the board. But the board, they gave the 3% to. So when you get the increases, the board got 3%, the board chair 3%, the county attorney 5% increase, auditor 3%, sheriff 6.42%, treasurer 5.62%. Again, these are recommendations. They'll be acted on during the public hearing, March 12th. All right. And we're going to set the date and time for the public hearing before we're done here. But again, these are just recommendations. The board can discuss them on themselves or the elected officials, whoever, and determine what you want to do at that point in time. So what you need to do is receive this letter from the compensation board, and we'll keep it on file and have it, at the regular public hearing.
I move to receive the compensation board suggestions.
Second, motion by DeWitt, second by Raddick to receive. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Passes 5-0.
Mr. Chair,
Yes,
quick question. Did any supervisors attend this meeting?
I did not.
Have any?
There were none there.
Okay. And then question for our parliamentarian, Pat. Would we act separately on the 2,200 and 3,500 and then the percentage, or is the percentage that we were
No,
reducing?
it's all, the way it works is that, I don't know if you saw an email I sent to you, but it's all put together in a dollar figure, and you're acting on that dollar figure as a total.
Okay. So instead of the 3 or 5%, it's the fractional percents that
Right.
some
Do you have
elected
that,
officials
Dennis?
Yes, I do. Right.
Have you seen that? I sent an email.
have. Okay.
So what it does is that they had a catch-up for a couple of the positions, and then they called it a cost of living increase, and then, but you act on the total dollar amount. That's what the code section talks about, is that's what you're working, that's what you're dealing with. You can only reduce, by the same percentage across the board once the raise is put together. So do you see what?
Yes. Okay. Thank you.
But we don't do that today.
No. You're just receiving it for publication.
All right, so let's,
The other item would be the Comm Center. I just talked with Lynn a minute. They're going to make a decision tomorrow. What I have plugged in the budget is with the improvements. If they deny the improvements, then we can change it and reduce it at our public hearing. If they approve it, at least we have the money in there. Now, you can deny it, but then how do you fund a half a position? This is the trouble when you got two entities on the same board where one could deny it, the other one could approve it, then what do? Hire half a person? It makes it very difficult.
Can't do that.
No, a little hard.
What's the total amount represented by that?
17,000.
so that's about the difference.
That's our share.
Yeah.
So that we'll have to take up at the public hearing. And that's all I have until we set the date here and time. But does any other board member have anything they want to look at? The whole thing is subject to review anyway. You can't go up, but you can go down.
Do you have any recommendations, Dennis?
No, we've pretty much gone through all, we went through them last week, and then whatever we did today would be good. The only adjustment I'll have to make in the budget is adding the compensation board recommendations into the budget, plus the deputies. And to give you an idea, the increase that they get, if you allow the whole thing, would be about 1/10 of 1 cent. It's pretty, what you call, immaterial. So you can go from that. So with that said, we'd like the board to approve for publication, our public hearing, March 12th at 4:45 p.m. Not a.m., p.m.
I'll move that.
Second.
Motion by Raddick, second by DeWitt. Any other discussion? All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Anyone opposed? Passes 5-0.
I did go ahead and figure out the differences we did where we gave district health money, decreased the transfer. So in countywide, it will be approximately 3.43 cents down in our tax rates on countywide. Rural basic will be up about 21.46. And basically, I was going to just mention an individual I saw or talked to this morning that I tried to explain to him the rural basic, why it went up. After I got done through explaining the 350, the rollback on agricultural property went from 47% to 54%. So there's a 7% increase on a $100,000 property. Their assessment taxable wise went up 7,000. So with a combination of the 21 cents plus 7,000, yeah, I said you're going to be paying more taxes, but there's nothing this board can do about it unless they want to lose dollar per dollar. They don't control rollbacks. He left. He was satisfied with the answer and says it's just how it goes with the rollbacks. It shifts class of property, pay the bulk of the bill, or not the bulk, part of the bill. So, and he farms down by Hampton, quite a sum of land. So that's just one individual out there, but they at least understood it was this board's problem. It's the system that mandates stuff to do, or else you lose. That's all I got, unless you have any other questions.
So, as a whole, though, disbursements are up for about, what, 1.6 million? Is that the...
The actual budget is up 1.9 million. Your tax asking is only up 788,000. The reason there's a big difference there is you got carryover funds from secondary roads for bridges and things that's being carried over, being expended next year. You aren't taxing for that. The money's already there. Same way with a lot of our CIP projects. There's some carryover that we rebudget next year. Funds are on hand. So that's the differential between the 1.9 budget increase. Yeah, that looks pretty big. Your taxes went up to 778,000, which is 75,000 less than the taxes you could have taxed by leaving the tax rate flat.
So we've got Sheriff's Department was the highest increase, but then Conservation was at like 238,000. Was most of that because of that CIP project, that paving?
Yes.
That won't be there in the future, is that correct?
For next year. But on the CIPs, you have to remember also that even though we have them all received as projects for next year that has to come back to the board, we don't borrow the money till May of 20. So that CIP can change weekly.
Sure.
Until we get ready to borrow money.
But that doesn't have a tax impact right now.
It does not. That doesn't impact. CIP for next year does not affect until 2021. And capital projects, debt service, which we use, is not affected by the property tax limitations as it now stands.
So the disbursement that went up 238,000 then for Conservation, or are we just spending more in parks? Is that?
Yeah, I think I had it broke down there on the sheet I gave you.
Yeah, 183 went to parks. Well, I guess actually it's got asterisks.
Well, now you got to, okay, you got to remember the CIP, there's improvement projects in those original numbers.
Improvement request.
So you had 150-some thousand, I believe, there were improvement project, or improvement requests that were denied by the board.
Did we approve the 153 improvement request for Conservation?
No, you did not.
Well, that shows in this.
That's the two positions they're requesting.
Okay, so that shows in this.
Yeah,
that you
that's
still-
what we originally started with there.
Okay. Okay. So this just wasn't updated necessarily?
Right, that was the
Okay.
beginning. I didn't touch that since the beginning.
Okay.
Because we kind of just pushed that aside, just concentrated by each week on each department division.
All right, well, let's take 3 minutes again here. We'll be back 4:32.